Did you?
No, 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 no.
I'll meet you after.
Just concentrate.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes, I'm not sure
I am
who that
Silvia
is.
Gaia. I am working in UNICEF, and I am the Senior Advisor for Climate, Environment, and Water and Sanitation Programs. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you today in the first ever Water Pavilion at the COP, and at the first day dedicated fully to talk about climate-resilient water and sanitation. We are going to have a very packed program today, because we want to have from now 9 in the morning here in the UK until 5 p.m. We're going to have the whole day dedicated to climate resilient wash, and we are going to have 4 main blocks of our sessions. We are going to start with the session on adaptation. Then we will follow with a session that will be dedicated to policy advocacy and monitoring. Then we will be looking at climate financing for the water and sanitation sector, and we will end up talking about the mitigation. We have prepared this ambitious program for the whole day because we think that we have very good messages to share with you. This effort has been done from the side of multiple organizations. You will see that have been really preparing all these materials. You will hear a lot of speakers from a lot of countries all over the world. And we want to bring really the voice also from those who are most affected by the climate change, and they are voiceless, and they will be with us today to make the case on how the water and sanitation sector is really important, is really key for the climate agenda, and is really key to contribute to the race zero and to the race to resilience. I welcome really all the colleagues that comes from the water and sanitation sector, but I welcome even more all the other colleagues that comes from other sectors, because here today we have very important messages to you, and we hope that you will be able to stay tuned until the end of the day, because we have key messages from you today, and we want to really show how our sector is really key to achieve the climate agenda. We, of course, as a sector, we are very much affected by the effects of climate, because, of course, droughts means less water available for the services that people rely on. Floods also affect and disrupt the services that the population needs for drinking water and for sanitation and hygiene. We see also how the sea level rise also has an influence in salinization on the aquifers that the population in coastal areas relies on. And it's a huge amount of people that rely on those aquifers. So we are going to see all these examples of how our sector is affected today. But we're also going to see how our sector, water and sanitation, really contributes to the adaptation and the mitigation agenda. And investing in these activities is key to achieve the climate commitments that we are having done at global level and at country level. So for that, we have this ambitious program today, and we have a lot of people that are here, a lot of people that will be connecting online, because we are in a hybrid mode, less people traveling and a lot of people connecting. And this makes an event and a whole day that is going to be very diverse, and as I said, presenting a lot of studies and a lot of cases and a lot of examples of the work that is being done to showcase the potential of our sector on the climate agenda. So without further ado, let me just give the floor to Jose Gesti, who is going to explain you the first session now that we are starting, the Adaptation 1, how it's going to unfold. So Jose, over to you.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, we have, as Silvia is saying, we have a first session on adaptation. This is going to be a 2.5 hours session long, so it's a long session, but it's really, really interesting. This session is structured into 3 different parts that combined make the 2.5 hours a real interesting story. And each of these parts comprises a framing presentation and then interesting case studies. And this is the good news, is that we have case studies from the South. So this is going to be a session where you're going to feel really how developing countries are working on climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene. As I said, we have these 3 different parts. We also have, as you know, we are broadcasting this on YouTube channel, and we are expecting you to please share with us your comments and your views. We will be monitoring the chat box, and we will try to have, towards the end of the session, a Q&A with, where we will try to pick up some of the questions. So, as we said, we have 3 parts now in these 2 first hours, 2.5 hours. The first part is going to be focusing on the climate resiliency of water sanitation and hygiene services, infrastructure, and also the resilience that they build to they help contribute the community, to build community resilience. Here we will have Sylvia, that you have already known, making a presentation on behalf of UNICEF, and then she will be explaining about a sector framework that is being developed in collaboration with the Global Water Partnership. This is a sector framework on water sanitation and hygiene climate resilience. And then we will have case studies from the South. Indeed, UNICEF headquarters will make some legal interventions to present case studies from Bangladesh, Mozambique, and Madagascar. And we also have UNICEF Pakistan here, who will be talking about the Green and Clean Pakistan initiative. We also have a super interesting case study from Nepal with different partners joining in this effort. We have the International Water Management Institute, we have SMV, and we have WaterAid joining forces to make a super interesting case study on Bangladesh and how they work with the resiliency of water sanitation and hygiene. This will make the first part of this session, and then we're going to zoom in into another interesting aspect of water sanitation and hygiene climate resilience, which is in the urban context and in the context of the utilities, water and sanitation utilities. Here, this part is coordinated by the UN Habitat. We will have a framing presentation by the Institute for Planetary Security. And again, we will have interesting case studies from the South. We will have Kenya, a Nature Conservancy. We will have Jamaica, the National Water Commission. And we will have a short video clip from the Global Water Operators Partnerships Alliance. This will make the core of the second part, and then the third part is going to round up this 2.5-hour session by acknowledging that water sanitation and hygiene services are very important, but we will never have resilient services if we don't have resilient resources. So the third part of this session is going to focus on how actually climate adaptation and climate resilience is what is going to help us glue the services and the resources, and how do we break the silos, existing silos, between water sanitation and hygiene and water resources management. Here we have the Stockholm International Water Institute making a framing presentation. We have UNDP also framing a little bit the conversation, and we will have as well case studies from the South with a conversation with a couple of countries. Indeed, if you allow me, I have them here. It's going to be, yeah, we will have Cabo Verde and Liberia performing as well as part of this discussion. Then, as I said, we will have a Q&A, we have time, and we will have closing remarks by UNICEF Director. So I think we are ready to go with the first part, Sylvia, so I hand over back the microphone to you.
Thank you, Jose, for presenting the agenda for this first session on adaptation, for the contribution to adaptation of the climate-resilient water and sanitation sector. And to start with, I think that we have one slide here available. And it's only one slide, so it's not going to be a lot of information, but we want to explain a little bit how the sector has started to think about this. Very important. In order to include the climate into the water and sanitation, we started, of course, as a sector. What do we want to really achieve, right? And what we want to achieve water and sanitation services that are sustainable over the time, even if they are climate events, climate shocks, and changes in climate, in aquifers, in droughts and floods, that the services will continue to be able to run. So we realized that we need to incorporate climate resilience in everything that the sector does. And it's not a question of having climate resilient water and sanitation services or just water and sanitation services. We see that we need to transition and to shift to a situation where everything that this sector does is climate resilient, because otherwise it's not going to stay forever. And it's not going to serve the purpose of serving the population. So what we did at that time was to really try to develop a framework where the countries will find support, technical understanding of how we were going to do this. And you have this slide here, which is the presentation of the framework. And this framework has 4 main areas. But before going into this, let me start by explaining what is the objective of this framework. It has 3 objectives. Mainly, as I said, to see how we are going to shift into having all the services of water and sanitation and hygiene services that are climate resilient. This is an important objective. At the same time, we want to see how these services contribute to increase the resilience of the communities. And of course, as a third and very important objective is to see how our sector is going to be carbon neutral, or closer, or as much closer as that is possible to become climate neutral, or at least reduce as much as possible the carbon footprint of our sector. So these are the 3 objectives of this sector framework. And it has 4 main areas or dimensions or quadrants. Is this donut that we see here on the screen, right? The first of all is understanding the problem, understanding how the climate is affecting the water and sanitation sectors. And as I said before, of course, droughts and floods cause a lot of service disruption. We see salinization. We see entire water resources that the people depend on that are getting more difficult to be sustainable and to be available when it's needed. So it's important to understand how is going to be this impact. And of course, we have there some key materials to do risk analysis and a tool that is designed for helping our sector to analyze these risks and understand these risks. And once we know that, of course, we need to incorporate this knowledge and this risk into the design of the optimal solutions. How are we going? What are the climate resilient solutions for water and for sanitation and for hygiene look like, right? So we need to look at what are our options and appraise them in order to be able to see what is our menu, what will work better, what will be more efficient, what will be more cost efficient, what is going to stay for longer time, what is going to be more convenient, more affordable for the population. We need to understand all these elements in order to then shortlist the best options for the sector. And then when we have these options, implement those options and go at a scale. And countries are already starting to scale up hugely the options on climate resilient water services, climate resilient sanitation services, and hygiene services. And finally, of course, we have an important dimension, which is the monitoring of all these, understanding which is our target. We need, of course, to have a monitoring system that will explain us how to, that will help us to reach to understand where we are and to be able to reach our targets. And we are having a dedicated session in the next block of the activities after this one that will be dedicated to this monitoring. So for this framework, we have developed all these different technical briefs as a part of this framework, there has been a lot of trainings in a lot of regions and countries in order to make it available to everyone and to all the sector colleagues and sector stakeholders and, of course, governments. And we are happy to say that more than 80 countries now are already, in a way or another, implementing this climate resilient water and sanitation framework. And the cases that we have here today, we really relate in a way or another to this framework. And of course, we are going now to move into this part of the session where we are going to showcase with examples. And these examples come from countries that are doing any of these parts are understanding better the problem, are identifying solutions, are scaling up solutions, and are seeing how the sector is becoming more and more resilient, and how they, of course, increase community resilience on this, and of course how this will reduce the carbon footprint. But this particular one of the reducing the carbon footprint will come into another session, which is the last session of the day, and there you will see a lot of examples of mitigation and how our sector contributes to the mitigation agenda. So you will hold from this, we'll hold you from this until the end of the day. So let me now then start this session with case studies, starting but a couple of interventions from colleagues from UNICEF headquarters. We have today with us Fiona Ward and Jorge Alvarez Sala, who are both experts on water and sanitation and are leading the agenda inside UNICEF on the climate resilient wash, on water security, and on water scarcity. And they are both going to present some of the cases. And then I will introduce the other cases that will be presented by other people that are here with us today. I will present them as we go. So now let me hand over Fiona. So over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Fiona Ward. I am a water and sanitation specialist with UNICEF. As Sylvia has mentioned, climate resilient water and sanitation saves lives. Ensuring water and sanitation services are resilient is really no longer an optional add-on. Historically, integrating climate resilience was seen as an additional burden, an extra burden, and one that could only be addressed with separate earmarked funding, and one with dedicated, really expert technical support. There was a perception that integrating climate resilience into the design of water and sanitation services would really delay the construction of badly needed construction services and the needs, of course, to meet the Millennium and Sustainable Development Goals. And also there was a perception that it would consume a lot of additional funding. So when resources are limited, people were concerned that implementing climate resilience would really delay the scale and the scale of the results and the speed of those results. Business as usual was really business as usual. Water and sanitation wanted to continue at full speed to reach those Millennium Development Goals and then later this Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, after all, there was a lot of work to be done. But climate change is not going to wait for the water and sanitation sector to catch up. Climate change and extreme events are already impacting the affordability, sustainability, equity, and safety of water and sanitation services. It is no longer a choice between reaching more people with a less climate resilient water and sanitation service, or less people with a more climate resilient water and sanitation services. There is no choice to be made. We should only provide services which are climate resilient and not those which are partially climate resilient, or perhaps those which are only resilient for water and not sanitation, or perhaps only resilient for some types of climate risks and not all types of climate risks. We need to, and of course, we're not just focusing, as Sylvia mentioned, in terms of our approach on infrastructure. It's also about the sustainability and the operation of those services. There are lots of opportunities for the sector in terms of creating livelihood opportunities, creating jobs, skills, youth engagement. And of course, there's also opportunities for leveraging large-scale climate financing. So as Sylvia mentioned and Jose mentioned, we'd like to share some of the examples that we have. We're showcasing two examples here today. One is from Bangladesh and the other one is from the work in Mozambique. So if you could help us show the video, thank you very much. Thanks for your time today.
Hello, I'm Nargis here in Khulna in the coastal belt of Bangladesh. This region is home to about 20 million people and half of whom are children. The people here are already experiencing the impact of extreme weather and climate change in their daily lives. through increasing intensity of cyclone, storm surge, and rising level of saline. The fresh water in this area is scarce because there is no rainfall for about 7 months of the year, and both shallow and deep aquifer are saline. To make things worse, the existing water sources are heavily contaminated by bacteria. So when there is a storm or cyclone, the freshwater reserves become polluted, and the scarcity of water becomes severe. To solve this problem, UNICEF partnered with Dhaka University, government partner DPHE, and Acacia Water Netherlands to secure the freshwater sources for these communities through a system called MAR, Managed Aquifer Recharge. Now we'll look into a short video to understand the technology. So this is a technology that collects rooftop rainwater and pond water and passes it through a filter. Water is then injected into a saline aquifer where it creates a freshwater bubble. So the water is underground, safely stored and protected against storm surge and contamination. And people here can collect safe water through a hand pump, which people here are very much familiar with.
We are standing at a place where we started a new research in Bangladesh. So we are using pond water and rooftop rainwater to store it underground. You can see water trickling here coming from that tank, and we have sands inside the well. So water is passing through this sand, and we are storing it in the natural storage underground. So this is the thing we are doing. So why we are doing it? Because water quality here was not usable. So because of infiltration of this rainwater and pond water, so we are creating a freshwater buffer underneath. So like 3 years ago, there was no source of drinking water here. Now people are getting water from this well here, and every day few hundred people comes here and collect their water for drinking purpose.
Que Moçambique é dos países do mundo que sofre bastante com efeitos de mudanças climáticas, né? E como temos registrado vários ciclos de secas sistematicamente. E outro fato é que encontramos-nos numa zona que a dependência com os outros países em termos de recursos hídricos também é bastante evidente. E por causa disto, o país, o setor em si, tem estado a adotar sistematicamente ações com vista a colmatar esses aspectos de mudanças climáticas. E um dos grandes elementos que nós estamos a adotar como setor do abastecimento de água neste país é a transformação de sistemas que nós temos. Temos várias fontes dispersas, estamos a transformar isto em pequenos sistemas para o abastecimento de água. E a transformação desses sistemas saímos a ganhar, porque para além de serem sistemas que servem para o uso das comunidades, tanto para consumo das pessoas, também são usados para o abeberamento de gado e a produção mesmo agrícola. E isso tem um impacto muito grande na componente nutricional. E outra estratégia que nós estamos a adotar, principalmente para as zonas áridas, a exploração de furos bastante profundos, porque tem sido constatado que nós temos também limitações com a fonte de água, e então temos mesmo ido a sistemas com profundidades muito elevadas. Então estes elementos todos que temos estado a abraçar têm estado revelados extremamente importantes nesta componente de mudanças climáticas.
UNICEF has been supporting the government of Mozambique and other stakeholders in many different ways to move forward the agenda of climate change, adaptation and mitigation with focus on children. UNICEF has supported the National Directorate for Disaster Management to develop a platform for integrated management of emergency and disaster data and information. Besides, over the past year, UNICEF has been building or upgrading wash infrastructure to be more resilient to the effects of the climate change, such as the installation of solar panels to operate boreholes and multi-use water systems in communities and institutions, the creation of green space around the water points, and the promotion of adapted technical solutions for the construction of latrines.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for your presentation and also for this video with the experiences of Bangladesh and Mozambique. Now it's over to Jorge, also, as I said, also a water and sanitation expert in New York headquarters for UNICEF, that will be talking a little bit more about service resilience and also community resilience. So Jorge, over to you.
Two examples of climate-resilient water and sanitation infrastructures, which should be able to cope with more frequent and more intense extreme weather events, such as floods or droughts. Infrastructures are the visible part of the water and sanitation sector, but infrastructures are one part of the picture. We shouldn't forget that WASH are services and operate as part of the whole system, with different stakeholders and internal and external elements that influence the long-term sustainability of those services. Climate change adaptation in the WASH sector has to go beyond building stronger infrastructures and emphasize the importance of a stronger service delivery model able to cope with the changing climate, and also, very importantly, assure that resilient WASH services positively impact on an increase of the resilience of the communities. On the first point, on how to make services stronger, there are several elements that contribute to ensure that those basic services continue to operate during or after extreme weather events. So ultimately, what we want to assure is that if the infrastructure is damaged due to climate event, there is an utility or a water committee managing the system, and that they have a technical and financial resources to quickly put the service back in operation. It also means that tariffs are able to cover the operation and maintenance costs, but also that they are affordable to all and accessible to vulnerable and marginalized groups. It also means that spare parts are locally available and local technicians can conduct preventive measures and fix most of the problems without much need of external support. If the services are climate resilient, as Fiona explained, and they have a strong service model associated with it, we all agree that they will have higher chances to keep providing the services during and after those extreme weather events. Now, my second point. In our experience in many countries, water and sanitation services directly contribute to increase the resilience of the communities. For example, in the south of Madagascar, I will just share a slide now. In the south of Madagascar, UNICEF implemented MUS, or multiple use water service approach, to meet both households' domestic and livelihood needs, while at the same time ensuring the most efficient use of water sources in an area with limited fresh water due to the salinity of the aquifers. The program in Madagascar operates on three basic principles. Sustainability of groundwater sources needs to be ensured. Water services are to be paid for, and the quality of water for drinking purposes must be preserved. The MUS program is bringing multiple positive benefits to several districts in southern Madagascar, which are being affected at the moment by a very intense drought. MUS is having an impact on the multiple dimensions of poverty by taking a livelihood perspective and supporting services, which provide explicitly for actual water demands, both domestic and productive. By strengthening and diversifying water supply options within the community, the approach also contributes to improving climate change resilience. MUS is also improving the sustainability of water systems at the community level, because the greater level of economic integration of systems within communities. Cost recovery and attention to maintenance are improving with time, more so than in the case of single-use systems. The benefits of this go beyond climate change and are an example of effective and sustainable programming in the long term. The new crops are contributing to the diversification, promoting better nutrition and sustainable harvest, further increasing households' food security, economic stability, and children's nutrition. Women's earning potential has increased as a result of these small-scale irrigation schemes, which allow new users, mostly women, to cultivate crops and to improve their economic resilience to drought. Now, I will just share with you a very brief video of this example.
In areas most hit by water scarcity in Madagascar, water systems were constructed to provide water for domestic use as well as small-scale irrigation systems. This has allowed families to grow crops and to have convenient access to water without having to walk long distances. This has the added benefit of providing nutritious food for children and generating income for very vulnerable households. In the face of the rapidly intensifying climate crisis, we must collectively work together to ensure everyone has access to a climate-resilient water and sanitation service.
Also very important for increasing community resilience is to ensure that the behaviors from households and the entire communities will support the conservation of water, for instance, on reducing the use of water in areas where water scarcity is high and increasing due to climate change, that the catchment areas are protected to prevent pollution and to ensure that water will stay there. It means that behaviors are also considered, for instance, on water conservation in water scarce areas, and that beyond the infrastructures, those catchment areas are also protected. And water and sanitation services are developed taking into consideration other users and users. Drinking water often uses the same sources in terms of aquifers, rivers, as the irrigation sector, for instance. And therefore, any initiatives to increase resilience of water as a resource, as a service, has an impact in other sectors such as agriculture. This is something that you just have seen in the video from Madagascar. Finally, we have seen how the water and sanitation sector brings to communities not only options for income generation and livelihoods, but also provide opportunities for skilled job creation, therefore contributing to social and economic development of those communities. At the end, what we want is to have stronger services that are climate resilient and that contribute to increase the community resilience and overall the development of the communities most affected by climate change. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to pass the floor to Silvia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for this excellent example of Madagascar, where we can see how the community is increasing their resilience by linking the water services with their livelihoods opportunities. Very good case, very impressive. Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you Mr. Muhammad Irfan Tariq, which is the Director General for the Environment and Climate Change in the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan. And he is going to present a huge, important and fantastic initiative that the government is having in Pakistan for Green and Clean Pakistan. He will explain a lot to you, and I hope you will like it. Over to you. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. Thank you, Director.
I need to stand here. Thank you very much, Sylvia, and thank you very much for colleagues to provide this opportunity to share with you what Pakistan is doing in addressing climate change impacts on water and water sanitation and hygiene sector. So just to explain a bit on the context of Pakistan. Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. It has been in this category for the last 20 years, and is also a water scarce country. So which automatically means that we have water not available for a large set of population, and the climate change is a third threat multiplier in this context. So government of Pakistan, considering the impacts on the livelihoods and communities, had some innovative thinking, out-of-box thinking, and we came up with a project called Clean and Green Pakistan. Now, this project was launched by the Prime Minister, and it is it addresses issues related to water, sanitation, which includes waste management, both liquid and solid waste management, and has also a greening component, which accounts for planting a number of accounts for plantation of trees. This was launched by the Prime Minister himself, and it has 5 components. As I said, it is related to drinking water and sanitation and waste management and all that. The first phase of this project was in 9 cities, and the interest and the competition between cities generated so much of enthusiasm that now it has expanded all over Pakistan, and there are about 90 cities which are catching up with this project. It engages communities and local governments, and then creates a sense of competition between different cities. And then those cities, based on their performance, they are rewarded. So this is the major landscape of this project, and you would see that there are 5 thematic areas and 35 measurable indicators. It has proven to be an extremely successful project in the first phase, and now, as I said, we are entering into the second phase. This project had basically 2 broad elements. One was the based on 5 thematic areas, Clean Green Cities Index, and the second one was the Clean and Green Champions. Now this is where we attracted a lot of youth and a lot of people working on a voluntary basis, and and the slogan was "My City, My Responsibility," and this created a lot of interest especially in youth, in attracting towards waste management services and liquid waste management services and plantation activities. This has you can see the activities on the website of Clean and Green Pakistan, which also shows us the number of youth engaged and number of volunteers and the number of Clean Green champions there in which are engaged in these activities. Right? So this is broadly the what I just mentioned. 5 basic activities which are totally aligned with wash sector. And just to actually conclude on why did we do this project? Climate change, as you know, is impacting lives today. And what we did was we included this wash sector in our revised NDCs, which is the next climate agenda for Pakistan. Now, wash sector has been reflected very, very prominently in the NDCs. We have submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat, and the government of Pakistan is committed to work on those activities. You must have heard of people talking of getting net zero by 2070 and 2060. Pakistan considers that action has to be taken today. If we don't have drinking water today, we can't live, and we cannot survive till 2070 to wait and see that the impacts have been neutralized and now we can survive. This is a survival issue, and that is why we have planned this project, and now we plan to upscale this by accessing climate finance. I would stop here if there is any question, and thank you very much, Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Director, for this amazing case that you have here presented here today in the Climate Resilient Days at the Water Pavilion, to showcase how a country is really picking the issue, is really providing a priority of the water and sanitation activities to push and move the climate agenda forward, and how they are making a huge effort to scale up this nationally in all the cities and for all the people that are really suffering already in a country like Pakistan the consequences of climate change. This is a strategic move from the government of Pakistan, and really showcases a clear leadership that countries are taking into these issues and addressing the adaptation agenda in their countries. So it's excellent. Thank you very much, and we really appreciate that you were here with us today in person in the Water Pavilion in the Climate Resilient Day. Now we have the case of Nepal, where we are going to see how we continue to build this resilience in the communities, right, that we were talking about through inclusive water, sanitation, and hygiene. And this is a subject that is very close to all of us, the inclusion, the issues that relates with disabilities, with gender, and that this has to be for everyone, right, because everyone and the most vulnerable are the most suffering the consequences of climate change. We have several contributions. We are going to hear from Dr. Manohara Khadka, country representative from Nepal, from the International Water Management Institute. We are going to hear also from Ami Reza, SMB country director for Nepal and Bhutan, and also Ratan Budatoki, SMB Nepal project leader. And also finally, we are going to hear from Binesh Roy, which is the technical manager at Water Aid Nepal. So they are going to explain how Nepal is addressing and tackling these issues. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. Greetings from Kathmandu. I am Manohara Khadka. I work for International Water Management Institute, IWMI, based in Kathmandu. Today, IWMI, SNB, and Water Aid are very pleased to share our case, building community resilience through inclusive water, sanitation, and hygiene, a case of federal Nepal. Let me start with highlighting dynamics relationship between gender equality, social inclusion, and climate change in rural water supply services under federalism in Nepal, opportunity and challenge based on IMI ongoing research. Nepal has moved to the 3 level of federal government structure since the promulgation of new constitution in 2015. It has 761 government in local, provincial, and federal Nepal. One of the aspirations of federalism is to achieve equitable, inclusive development with greater focus on gender equality and social inclusion. People's fundamental right to water, sanitation, and hygiene are ensured through the new constitution. Role and power for water resource management, supply services are also devolved to local government that has 40% lawmaker. This shift in governance system is really creating opportunity for inclusive water management, water supply services, planning and decision-making in local level for building resilience of communities. National policy framework on climate change, water resource management also provide opportunity for inclusive adaptation planning in local level. As an example, Nepal government has set a target in which all local governments are expected to prepare and implement climate resilient gender responsive adaptation plan by 2030. National water policy draft water resource bill also focus on community-based water resource management, multiple use of water, and water supply services. Talking about gender social inclusion dimension in water management and water supply services in the context of Nepal, less than 1/5 of population has access to safely managed water services. Over 90% of girls, women contribute to manage water for drinking, sanitation, homestead farming in rural household. However, women, people with disability, disadvantaged group have limited access to safe and reliable water. They have no voice in water planning and decision making in community and rural municipality we have studied. Engineering perspective highly dominate in understanding water issues and water planning. A greater need for integrating gender social inclusion perspective and approaches to water resource management or water supply services is really need. Talking about dynamics relationship between water supply services, gender social inclusion, and climate change in Nepal. Nepal is highly vulnerable to the climate change. It is ranked as 4th climate vulnerable country globally. Impact of climate change on water availability and supply are evident. As an example, mountain springs are drying up. Most vulnerable population or social group impacted by the shortage of water are women, girls, people with disability, disadvantaged group, and minority. There has been limited study on gender dynamics of water supply in the context of fertilism and climate change. So water management with consideration of gender social inclusion are key to reduce climate-related water risks and build community resilience for water supply services. Now I pass on to my colleague from SNB. Thank you so much.
Greetings from Kathmandu, Nepal. We are here in the SNV office. We'd like to welcome all the COP26 participants, speakers, delegates, and those listening in to this Water Pavilion event. We will be sharing a case study about building community resilience through inclusion. SNV builds GESI, gender and social inclusion, into the heart of all our work. And we believe that building community resilience at local level is key to creating adaptations as the climate changes around us.
पहिला पानी सधैँ साउन महिना भदौमा पानी पर्थ्यो समयमा धानको रोप्नी पनि हुन्थ्यो तर पहिलाको हेर्दाखेरि अहिले मौसम जुन जलवायु परिवर्तन छ त्यो बिस्तारै बिस्तारै बदलिरहेको छ यसपालि पनि कार्तिक महिनामा बेमौसमी आँधी बहेरी वर्षाले हाम्रो धान बाली गदर बालीलाई सखाप पारिदियो
विपद पर्दाखेरि चाहिँ धेरै समस्याहरू हुन्छन् खानको समस्या हुन्छन् सुत्नको समस्या हुन्छन् लुगा कपडा लगाउनको समस्या हुन्छन् हिँड्न पनि समस्या हुन्छन् समस्याको अन्तै छैन त्यति समस्या हुन्छन्
यो जलवायु परिवर्तन भएको कारणले यहाँ कृषि उत्पादन पनि हुन सक्दैन अब गरिब बालबालिका महिला पिछडिएका जुन वर्गहरू छन् उहाँलाई धेरै अप्ठ्यारो भइहाल्छ लेबर क्लासको मान्छेहरू छन् काम पनि बन्द भइहाल्छ डुबान हुनुको कारण हामी पाङ्ता भएका व्यक्तिहरूलाई पानी खानामा त दूषित पानी खानामा धेरै अप्ठ्यारो हुन्छ बाटो घाटोलाई फोहोरो बनाइदिन्छ
प्रत्येक वडामा समूह गठन गरेका छु महिला समूह किशोरी समूह दलित समूह सबै समूह गठन गरेर समूहको माध्यमले जनचेतनामूलक कार्य गराउँछौँ गाउँपालिकाबाट समन्वय गरेर पानीको व्यवस्था गर्छौँ फिल्टरको व्यवस्था भयो छ सेनिटरी प्याड खाना फोहोर त्यसको पनि व्यवस्था गरेका छौँ
चेतनशील बनाउनको लागि हामीहरू पटक पटक विपद व्यवस्थापनको बाट र दलीय लक्षित वर्गबाट हामीहरू त्यसमा कार्यक्रम राख्छौँ
Community members in rural Nepal who have improved access to resources and power to influence decision making are better equipped to handle climatic disturbances in the short and long term.
वासिसीले गाउँपालिकामा सबै वार्डको वडा अध्यक्ष र सबै मान्छेको बोलाएर उहाँ के गर्छ विपद व्यवस्थापनमा यस सालमा सिकप अर्को सालको लागि योजना बनाएर विपद व्यवस्थापनमा के काम गर्नुपर्छ त्यो उनीहरू तालिम दिएर हामीहरूलाई सबैलाई सिकाउँछ। त्यसै अनुसार चाहिँ हामीले बजेटको विभाजन गर्छौँ।
SNB is supporting government of Nepal in accessing inclusive, sustainable and resilient rural water supply services. So here the inclusiveness and climate resilience water supply services are very essential and important to provide to all the people to achieve the leave no one behind concept of sustainable development goal.
Our case study shows building community resilience is fundamental as our climate changes around us. Inclusion is key to that. Whose voices are heard and whose problems are shared provides local government with the tools and information to make the right decisions around WASH.
Namaste, greeting from Nepal. I am Binesh Roy and I work as a technical manager with WaterAid Nepal. WaterAid is implementing water security and climate resilient project in Dolakha district since 2018 and supporting communities to build resilient water, sanitation and hygiene services. I'm going to share a case study of water supply scheme, and this is about the spring source that dried out suddenly in monsoon this year. Nepal is a largely mountainous country with high variability in climate. The climate diversity is driven by the complex topographical characteristics of Nepal. The frequency of extreme weather events has become more unpredictable in recent times in terms of the location and intensity of its impact. This has been observed directly from the variation of rainfall pattern in the last few years, which increases the incidence of certain landslide, flood and drought events. The local people have shared that the spring sources are drying and water depletion is rapid in recent years. This case is about the Chhare water supply scheme, where the spring source was dried suddenly during middle of the monsoon. The spring has been a source of water supply for the community for the last few years. Later, WaterAid supported to construct a new intake from a spring located few hundred meters at upstream that was identified as an alternate source by the communities. WaterAid has identified 6 characteristics of a community to ensure that they are resilient and enjoy sustainable water, sanitation and hygiene services. We are supporting communities to develop their capacity to meet these characteristics and sustain it for the long run. The participatory vulnerability and capacity assessment is a self-assessment tool for the community. The spring sources are protected with stone and concrete structures with extra fencing works so that it remains protected from the possible contaminations. Adequate care was given to maintain the downstream ecosystem of the watershed, and therefore at least 1/4 of the spring water is released to flow out naturally. To ensure water security, all the households have private tap connections and at least 65 liters of water is available to each person per day. Water quality is maintained as per the national standard. All the community have water safety plan with involvement of active team members. Operation and maintenance fund and monthly tariff collection is mandatory for the sustainability of the schemes. Village maintenance workers are the backbone of the users committee, who are paid monthly salary for the to provide 24/7 services. In addition to this, hygiene behavior change is a crucial part of the community resiliency, where WaterAid is using the behavior change design approach so that community can adopt and practice good hygiene behaviors. WaterAid had trained both local level duty bearers and community people on the right to water and sanitation. Social audit is the part of the project to make the water users committee accountable and transparent. Similarly, municipality has committed to ensure one house, one tap with reliable water services. WaterAid has supported the local government to prepare water sanitation and hygiene plan so that enough budget for the water sanitation and hygiene activity are allocated in line to meet the SDG targets. In this way, water aid is supporting to build community resilience, to tackle adverse impact of the climate change and ensure water security in the communities of Nepal.
Hi everyone, I'm Anita Raut from IMI and I'll be concluding Nepal case study with takeaways. We want to emphasize the interconnectedness between water and climate change. Climate hazards are becoming more prevalent, affecting daily life in various areas, including the water sanitation and hygiene. Now, Nepal's move to federalism and national climate policy framework provide opportunities to work towards gender and transformational water management to attain resilient water sanitation and hygiene goals. Supporting local institutions and encouraging community participation are critical in achieving this, recognizing local governments are key government agencies with significant power. They require technical, financial, and knowledge support in this. In this context, the pathways to build community resilience for inclusive water supply, sanitation, and hygiene services are by supporting policy and institutional capacity building of local governments and relevant stakeholders. Taking steps to empower women leaders, persons living with disabilities, and other groups on this is equally crucial. Adequate investment in water conservation, management, and water governance are necessary. Finally, it is critical to invest in social science research and knowledge development to assist local, provincial, and federal governments in developing evidence-based and gender and social inclusive, transformative policy planning, policy making, decisions for community and water system resilience. Finally, to conclude, IMI and SNV would like to acknowledge DFAT and Water for Women for their continuous support and partnership in our work. Nepal team from SNV, IMI, and Water Aid would like to thank you all for your participation and would like to conclude our country case now.
Sorry, we are transitioning from being with a mask and being without mask when we speak, so I didn't remind that. So thank you very much. I think that we are at the end of this first block, as Jose presented, where we have presented the climate resilient framework that the sector has as a reference to operate. And we have been able to present a lot of country cases that in a way or another relate with one of these dimensions of understanding the problem, how the sector is affected by the changing climate, how they are trying to identify and shortlist the best options and implementing the options at huge scale, like we saw in the case of Pakistan. We have also seen how it's important leaving no one behind and how it's critical for the sector to really look into the most vulnerable groups of the population and assure that they have a voice and they feel represented and they are, of course, covered by the services for their also development. So we have seen how this is implemented in many places around the world. We have seen all these experiences, and now we are going to transition to the next block. This first one, you have seen that a lot of the examples comes from rural areas, not all, but most of them. But also we wanted to do a zoom in the urban areas. What's happening there? What is the role of the utilities in all this? How are they going to be, or how are they already being a key sector partner in terms of looking at adaptation, contribution to the adaptation global agenda from the utilities work? So for that, we have a whole block that is going to talk about the role of the utilities in water sanitation, wastewater, and the relationship with climate. And to start with, we have Mr. Alexander Berbik, the director of the Institute for Planetary Security, online. The colleagues are telling me that he may not be online. Yes, he is, because we didn't know if we had you. So happy that you are here with us, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm speaking from Ottawa, so that's why I'm a little bit later. It's still night here in Ottawa. So good to join you. This week's Adaptation Gap report concludes that developing countries need to spend up to 10 times more public money than they do now or to implement climate adaptation measures to deal with more frequent drought and flooding and other weather extremes. And the report rightly states that climate financing for developing countries is not enough. But it also warns that governments are missing an opportunity to invest in green growth and deal with the current and future impacts of climate change. And we know from earlier reports, the report from 2 years ago, that some of the best investments to make are the low-cost adaptations, the so-called no-regret options that have a high benefit to cost ratio, and capacity building for water is typically one of those investments that you can make. And that is not only about the quantity of water that always gets the most attention in the media. When there's floods, when there's too much water, when there's a drought, it's more visible. But it's also about the quality, because bacterial or chemical pollution is affecting the water quality, and that is just as important to consider. So this is even more relevant since huge amounts of wastewater are still unsafely managed. To give you an idea of all the wastewater in the world that we are talking about, that is equal of 5 Niagara Falls next to each other. That's let's say all the wastewater of the world together. That's an incredible amount. And a good example of what is possible is UN Habitat's work to improve and increase the capacity of utilities that manage the wastewater and the sanitation. It improves the water quality, and that then strengthens the resilience of the local population against climate change effects. And I believe that we need a renewed focus on the positive role that utilities can play in improving water sanitation and wastewater, now that we increasingly experience all these negative effects of climate change. So let me give you 4 reasons for that. Well, first of all, many cities in the world are already behind on building and maintaining wastewater infrastructure. But on top of that, and that's the second reason, this challenge will only increase. So by 2050, so less than 30 years away from us, there'll be an additional 2.5 billion people in the world living in cities. And all these people will need water, and they will produce solid waste and they will produce wastewater to such an extent that by that time we're talking about 7.5 Niagara Falls of wastewater in the world. Now, third element to consider on top of this already not enough infrastructure and on top of this growth of cities is, of course, the impact of climate change. And it is clear, if you add all this together, that we have to deal with a massive challenge, because many slums in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and elsewhere are increasingly confronted with the impact of extreme weather like flooding. And if you think about flood damage, there's first of all the damage itself of the flooding, but then it is followed by the threat of raw sewage being spilled in the community when the insufficient or badly maintained or non-existent at all sewers can't cope with those floodwaters. And the other infrastructure that is in place, even if it was designed well, was never designed for these kind of extreme weather events. So the changing climate is clearly playing a role, and all this undermines the well-being of the people, their health, it's the economy. Think, for instance, about the impact on tourism, and it also increases inequality. And inequality brings me to the fourth reason for a renewed focus on sanitation and wastewater. That is that the story of water is often a story of inequality. The poor have less access to water, they have to pay a larger part of their income for it, and often their situation is not counted in the official statistics. And any policymaker can tell you that if you don't register a problem, nobody will design policies to improve their situation, which sustains or worsens the inequality. And here at COP26, and basically at all the previous 25 COPs, we are daily reminded of the relationship between climate and inequality. So if you combine the two, the water and inequality and the climate and inequality, it is clear that the impact of climate change on sanitation and wastewater is a kind of double whammy for the poor people in the poorer cities of the world. And these people already live in geographically the most unfavorable areas. Otherwise, the rich people would be living there. So if there's too much water, it ends up in their low-lying quarters without proper drainage, and they have less access to resources and less access to basic municipal services, and often have less capacity to adapt. And the climate change raises all these challenges that they are already facing. And if there's a shortage of fresh water, those that are not connected to the pipe services have sometimes to pay up to 10 times more. I've read about cases where it's even more than 10 times for privately provided water, which is often also of lower quality, and also the delivery service is not always at the moment that you need it. But if we look at all the global challenges that we are facing today, and at all the global goals, then there's a lot of hope and a lot of good news about sanitation and wastewater. For instance, we're not looking for all kinds of expensive high-tech solutions. We're not talking about technologies like carbon capture and storage that basically lives in the minds of scientists or on the drawing tables, where there's a few test locations but hasn't been up to scale yet. What we actually do is precisely the opposite. What we want to do is to take a step back and to encourage the use of well-known and often already locally used solutions. We already have the knowledge, the experience, and the relatively basic technology that we need. So instead of buying the latest high-tech solutions from the West, we're working with proven concepts that creates jobs and local jobs. And it's also a good investment that leads to socio-economic empowerment. And the UN Habitat helps water and sanitation operators from all over the world to help one another, and that leads to better services for more people. And also, if we work with nature-based solutions, it has a kind of built-in resilience that has the capacity it strengthens the capacity of the local population to withstand shocks. So if we look at all the world's challenges today, improving sanitation and wastewater is often the low-hanging fruit. It is doable. It gives you a great socio-economic return on investment, and that includes all kinds of health benefits. So when dealing with sanitation and wastewater, it's best to take a holistic view at the complete water cycle. You see, for instance, that there's a lot of unaccounted for water in cities. It leaks away in old and badly maintained pipes and underground infrastructure, and it simply just never reaches the taps. So if you make efficient use of water treatment facilities, it can be a way to delay investments for building new and expensive infrastructure, like all kinds of dams and whatever you need to provide fresh water. And wastewater also has huge opportunities for recycling that has all kinds of advantages, including on mitigation climate change, but of course also in the circular economy sense. And the improvements that need to be made are not just the facilities and the hardware. As we so often see when you deal with environmental policies, improvement also involves the governance and the cooperation structure. So for instance, the governance of an upstream catchment area influences the availability of water for the facilities and the population in a downstream city. So that's another element to look at. More is needed than just different levels of government working together. One of the best starting points to upgrade informal settlements is to improve the low-income households' access to urban sanitation. And to make that work, city government should also work with community organizations and NGOs and all kinds of relevant structures. And with rapidly growing cities, we simply don't have the luxury of time. Cities shouldn't allow for first urban sprawl and only then invest in utilities and water infrastructure in such a badly designed urban area. As we know from climate change adaptation in other areas, the per capita costs are so much higher compared to if you take early action. And having said all that, I don't want to take more of your time and move to our speakers of today. So I'd like to briefly introduce them. So we will first hear from Mr. Fred Chiara, the African Water Funds Director for the Nature Conservancy. And he will then be followed by Mark Barnett, the President of the National Water Commission in Jamaica. And then before I will conclude the meeting, there will also be a short video of the Global Waters Operators Partnership Alliance and their approach to climate resilience. So let's now move, and I already see him on the picture of my screen, to Fred Chiara. You have the floor. You're still muted.
Thank you very much, Alex, for a great introduction. And I bring you greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. I would like to get this on full screen. I confirm now that we're on full screen. We did put a presentation together, a brief one with Tobias from freshwater monitoring of the Netherlands. He's actually sitting in the audience. So him and I are teaming up in this one. I would like to be brief just to say that it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to bring some of the work that we're doing with utilities out here in the African continent and in other areas. And I'll talk a little bit about how collectively we are building resilient watersheds that can withstand climate change and provide benefits to our people. Just to give you a bit of background is to really say this is a publication that I would recommend for everyone. This is Build the Source. It's a publication actually published and available online from some 4 years back. And Build the Source did undertake a survey across thousands of cities in the globe to see where they get their water from and if they could make a contribution towards conservation of their watersheds. And as you will see in the map, the greener the dot for your city, the more possible it is that you can actually make a contribution. And largely the greener cities have smaller watersheds, and you can actually fix it. And we realize that 1 in every 6 cities can actually fix the challenges they face in terms of fresh water supply just by working on their watershed using operation and maintenance savings that they'll get from their utilities. So again, multiple benefits here. Build just water, carbon, health, economic opportunities. And I would recommend everybody to have a chance. Go ahead and download Build the Source and see for yourself some of the results. So the Nature Conservancy, together with other partners, have been working on developing a model called Water Funds. And this model is very suiting for some of the SDG 6 targets. What can we do to work and fix water-related ecosystems? It's a simple model, like you can see there. We do appreciate that many cities get their water from fresh water, from surface water. And most of this fresh surface water is coming from up the hills, up the mountains, and in some cases in forests and national parks, like we have in many places in Africa. And when the city is small, it can actually fix its challenges easier. But as the city grows, it faces the challenges of the population is increased. So the city is increasing its infrastructure or expanding it, and then they're having to expand their water intakes wherever the water comes from. And that provides some challenge because it gets to a point where the city outstrips its water source. So what happens in this particular case is that the water funds help the stakeholders around the city to link up with their water sources and create a symbiotic relationship So those who live upslope need technical expertise on how to do it well. They also need support with resources to be able to get the materials they need and use that as investment. And of course, those who in the city would like to have clean water in ample quantity. So this becomes the city, the downstream beneficiaries provide incentives to those who are upstream, and those who are upstream take care of the watershed, and ecosystem benefits like clean water and so on can actually come down to the city, and everybody benefits. So out of that, you get cities are more secure. In terms of water security, we have more waterborne sanitation now has resources, and we also see of late how important it is to also provide water as a means to good health for our people and our communities. And this is spreading across the globe now. We have an idea that started in Quito, in Ecuador, has now spread in virtually all continents, and we have about 43 waterfalls that are growing in 13 countries, and this is increasing each year. All the ones that you can see in orange dots are the ones that are actually at the development, and they join these numbers and they grow. So Alec, from your contribution, I really appreciated the fact that you brought out the idea of having a good governance system. Waterfalls bring both public, private sector to come and work together with communities wherever it is. And getting a good governance mechanism is very important for this success. So waterfalls emphasize two things: good governance, and also I just explained about a financial mechanism. How can you make sure that you can look at the sky, you can look at the generations to come and see that you can safeguard their source of water? That's what waterfalls emphasize. So I'll give you a quick brief about Nairobi. Nairobi is a city that way back some 7-8 years ago had huge water rationing. We could hardly afford the water demand that was there. And the city has continued to grow. 95% of the water for the city comes from this one river, Tana. And that's also 65% of Kenya's hydropower. There are 9 million people served, 4 in the city and 5 out there. And we have 2 important national parks in the Bedeas and the Mount Kenya World Heritage Site. And we've taken care of this. So it took stakeholders to come together. And this is the mechanism of the water fund. And in 2016, even Kenya government declared Nairobi water fund as a national priority. The city utility of Nairobi has been in the lead as a leader in some of the downstream beneficiaries, and so have been many other corporates and also public agencies. So the water fund has been, the water fund is created just for that purpose: take care of our sources of water. And then 2018, we saw presidential decree in this country, and our president is out there in Glasgow and again making the same point that everybody should invest. It's everybody's business, taking care of our water sources. And then a business case was developed that actually says exactly what you're saying. If you can develop some good infrastructure, green infrastructure up there to take care of the green infrastructure, for every $1 you invest upslope, you prevent having to invest $2 further downstream in cleaning the water or expanding the infrastructure. And that has become a big contribution. And the financial mechanism is in place. We have stakeholders put in money, starting with government and private sector companies as well. And then that now has grown with investments. We're now building a fund, a capital fund. And as late as last Saturday, corporates were still together with government, trying to see how they can make this also like an endowment. How can we have endow this process so that we shall always have the money needed to undertake conservation and protect our watershed? Again, getting down to business, what we've seen unique with water funds, and I think with many other initiatives that are successful, is being able to work at scale. Have clear goals. Water comes from nature. Let's go there and protect and conserve our water sources. That way we get clean water. And by working with communities there, let's ensure that communities benefit, landowners benefit. And let's have clear strategies. Let's fix those forests. Let's fix the farms. Let's fix the riparian buffers. And out of that, we can get lots of benefits. And like you can see there, we're planting lots of trees, working with many farmers, and also ensuring that we can harvest rainwater, which is what the communities need. Again, keeping it cheap. We're working in a developing world. We're working in areas that globally do not have a lot of resources. It takes a tenth the amount of money you would invest in JoJo tanks. When you do a water pan like I have in the right, they are now UV treated liners, and you can line them, and this one harvests 100,000 liters of water, and this farmer can harvest from the runoff from the farm, can harvest from the roofs, and that water is used for purposes in the home, including farming. Everybody has a role and they can do it. And then, of course, we're managing the work with the utilities, making sure that all the farmers who are irrigating from the rivers when it's dry, the dry season, can now have their own water, and they do it. And we're having good numbers for this. But let me just talk a little bit about the governance bit, because it's very important to provide a platform for many of our leaders to engage. Leaders in corporates come and join government to support communities to be successful. And that's very important. And then making it cheaper by working with local community groups and local NGOs there to just make sure that delivery is faster and cheaper. Again, this work now has no proprietary. We're working with Catholic Relief Services out in Freetown. We are working with WWF North Africa out in Morocco in the Cebu. IUCN has joined the work in Dakar, Senegal. Water for People is working with us in Blantyre, Malawi. Everywhere there's all these needs, and then we're working with the partners who are available, and we're seeing this grow into a movement. I talked about Nairobi, and Nairobi has seen quite a number of results since 2015 when they launched their business case. I may not go through all this, but it's true, it's evident that they've worked with on over 300 kilometers of river stretches. They worked with farmers in close to 90,000 acres that have been fixed. And at the bottom there, you'll be able to notice that there's now 15% improved base flow during the dry seasons. And that makes a difference, because we've just come out of a dry season, and people, I can say water was reliable. The utility was able to provide water when it needs, unlike before. I also want to point out that we've been tracking together with the utility. Does green infrastructure actually really work? And you can see from our graph that the utility is seeing less use of chemicals in terms of quantities that they need to treat the water. And there's a significant reduction of up to 40% by now, having looked at the baseline of 2013 years, about 8 years, you can see about 40% decline in the use of aram in the community, with the communities there. Again, the movement is growing. This is an invitation by Her Worship, the Mayor of Freetown, to make sure that partners come together and help Freetown solve its challenges for water. And this includes, of course, sanitation, climate, and also flood mitigation, and making sure that we have both the healthier people and also a good habitat. We have the Western Area Peninsula National Park, light upslope of Freetown, which is a port city there, and with a lot of challenges for water supply. We're fixing it, and we do believe that we can get that working. An example again in Brazil, where stakeholders came together and formed a Green Blue Water Coalition. And out of that, they were able to put together about $5 million that they were able to support not just major cities, but also smaller municipalities that may not have a nice budget balance sheet or P&L as a water utility. And they were able to work on all of them and make sure that everybody can take care of their fresh water sources, and that benefits most of the people. So again, we take very robust monitoring, because we invest finances that are contributed by people who care. So they don't just receive results, but we track to make sure that they can see that we're keeping up with what we promised across the continent. We're doing this, but I've had quite a number of citations and quotes in this COP26, but I'd like to add one more, which is really like, in a week's time or so, we'll be home and we can go, and I think it's time to do something once we put the bags down. We are convinced, and I think it's time for us to take action. I think we can comfortably and proudly say we're the people we've been waiting for. And of course, when we get home, let's do something, let's get it done. Again, it takes people like us to get things done. And I definitely, on top of the many partners that I mentioned, and CB, I also helping with Addis Ababa, I like to explore, to broaden this invitation to also partners like UN Habitat to provide the science and UNICEF, so that we can actually make sure that the people who need water for sanitation can actually get it and also be able to implement the activities. I'll stop here and say thank you very much and welcome you anytime to invite us, and we can do water facts in the point in the city that where we can help. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think looking at the clock, we immediately move on to Mark Barnett. Are you there, Mark?
Yes,
okay.
I'm here. Coming up in just a few minutes.
Kumi, nice to meet you. I was so happy to see you tell the joke on stage.
Oh, that. Okay.
It's not a proud time for Australians.
Oh, good. Did you see that?
Yeah, yeah, I've got the video of it.
Oh, I'm already sure. Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Fred, for your presentation. I'm going to just be very brief in terms of my presentation and just to demonstrate some of the things that the only water utility here in Jamaica is doing as it relates to building an adaptive capacity through climate resilient water and sanitation solution. So this is just a quick introduction, and just to let you know, as you all know, water is a very big topic. We can speak for hours upon hours around water and all the issues there are. So my presentation will focus on 3 particular areas, and just to demonstrate some of the things that we have been doing. First, on wastewater treatment, improved wastewater treatment, non-revenue water, which we believe is significant in the context of climate change and watershed management. So just to demonstrate some of the things that we have been doing, we partnered with Jeff IDB on what we call a crew project here in Jamaica, where we rehabilitated or decommissioned some of our wastewater facilities as part of an improved sanitation services for various communities. In this exercise, we would have replaced by building new facilities and decommission some by constructing conveyance systems to centralized location, as well as rehabilitating some facilities. And this we did about 13 wastewater plants dispersed right across the island, as well as through NWC's own effort, we would have done 3 additional facilities. This gives a synopsis of the type of facilities that we would have worked on: activated sludge system, waste stabilization ponds, which incidentally we prefer as a result of the natural treatment process, aerated lagoons as some. The other area that we focus on, and we would have undertake loan financing to look at our water supply network, because what we believe and what we have found, reduction in non-revenue water reduces our carbon footprint as a utility, and water utilities inherently depends on your geographic location, can be a huge producer of carbon to the environment. So what we have looked at is how can we reduce the amount of wastage or losses, or reduce the volume of water that we pull from the environment to treat, to distribute. And so we engage on what we call a co-management non-revenue water program, starting in the corporate area of Kingston. The outcome of that activity, which lasted for 5 years, was a reduction of system input volume by about 70,000 meter cube per day, which, as I've shown here, saved us just about $3 million US per annum, in addition to the carbon savings that we would have also made. We have also reduced non-revenue water by about 50,000 cubic meters per day out of that program. Additionally, we would have reduced our energy consumption as a result of that program, and improve supply to the customers from an average of 18 hours per day up to 23.5 hours per day. The next program that we would have engaged on with other partners locally, which was a funding arrangement through JF, IDB, and the government of Jamaica, was to look at a watershed area that produces just about 42% of the potable water needs to the capital. And so we thought that is an important area to focus on to ensure that there's sustainable water resources to meet growing population as well. And the successes from that program, which ended just about last year, was a reforestation of over 500 acres. The results are here. Engagement of individuals who are practitioners and lives in those areas, and ensure that technology become part of the process in how we make decision, design a sustainable financing scheme, review of the watershed policy, programmatic review of watershed area management mechanism. While I quickly go through this presentation, I also want to just emphasize as well, part of the National Water Commission's emphasis is how to integrate more renewable energy in our system. And so we have embarked on a massive renewable energy implementation program that will see us reduce our consumption from the national grid, which predominantly is fossil fuel based, to use renewables at some of our most high energy consuming facilities as part of our adaptation and sustainable effort to ensure water supply is available, even available during times of particularly hurricane season, which we are most vulnerable and oftentimes experience. I want to thank UN Habitat and the team for inviting me, and I just wish to say thank you very much for the early morning wake up. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this. Before I sum up the conclusions of this session, I think we will first now show a short video about QOPA, the UN Habitat hosted Global Water Operators Partnerships Alliance. It helps water and sanitation operators to help each other to provide better services to all. So this is a wonderful tool to exchange experiences between water operators partnerships, or the WOPs, and Habitat works across all regions, and so there's huge opportunities for peer-to-peer learning from one region in the world to the other. And it's a good example of how Habitat is good at bringing ideas from other regions and then helping local actors to adapt these ideas for their particular purpose, and to adapt these where needed, also making use of the local knowledge that's there and nature-based solutions. So this video, it's a short video. It captures the highlights of the 4th Global WOP Congress, where climate resilience was the central theme, along with sanitation. So I hope somebody can push a button that the video will start, because I cannot do that from here.
How can we collectively play a role in creating a climate resilient future leading to and beyond Glasgow?
Operators are walking the talk every day. You understand water and its relationship to health, security, equality, economic opportunities, and climate risks like no other.
Most water supply and sanitation systems were planned and constructed in a different climate context than we are experiencing today. Many water and sanitation operators are already integrating climate considerations to make their operations more sustainable and resilient, for the well-being of communities and the safety of their personnel. This includes risk assessment and contingency planning, monitoring and reporting, and collaboration. Operator staff are developing and implementing climate-resilient practices and measures into the water and sanitation systems. They are the ones walking the talk, putting theory into practice. Water operators' partnerships are a powerful way to make more utilities climate resilient. WOPs allow utilities to share their practical skills, knowledge, and solidarity with each other to build their capacity and improve their resilience. Peer-to-peer learning can help develop more climate-resilient water supply and sanitation operations for an uncertain climate future. Join the discussions on what climate resilience means for water and sanitation operators.
That's it. Just a very short few concluding remarks. As I look at the clock, we have like 1 minute left on my clock. Thank you, both speakers, very much for your presentations, and also Tobias Smit on the background. A few central themes that come out of here. Importance of good governance, cooperating with all involved parties. There's a lot of win-win situations where nature wins, things that are good for climate, for planting trees, but at the same time the people win and water wins because we have more and cleaner water, more reliable water, and of good quality. So these are a few inspiring examples. And I think one of the conclusions is it's good to invest in these kind of projects. It's a good return on investment in many ways. So let's focus on utilities, on sanitation, and on wastewater management, and let's keep cooperating together and share these experiences. Back to you, Sylvia, and thank everybody for watching this segment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, all the people that contributed with the case studies in Kenya and in Jamaica. It has been wonderful to hear you and to understand, doing the zoom in, understanding really much better how the utilities are going to play or are already playing a key role in the adaptation agenda, in the global adaptation agenda, through the providing this water and sanitation, climate resilient services. And I totally agree with you, Mark, when you are saying that this is really value for money and is really a good investment case. We have seen the importance of the work you are doing, and I really like this way of linking it also broader with the water services with the resources, right? And the importance of the protective environment and look at issues upstream in order to assure that then the services downstream will be really efficient and will provide the best to the users. So I really like that. And also, of course, the link that you are making with renewable energies that we, as I announced before in the opening of this session, we are going to have a dedicated session at the end of the day on mitigation and how water and sanitation contributes to the mitigation agenda. So thank you very much. And precisely because already in this intervention, there was already this link between the water as a service and the water as a resource links perfectly with the next subject and the last of these 3 blocks of the agenda for the adaptation in this session today. We are going to see that we have some silos that we need to break between the water resources and the water and sanitation services. But there is a group of people and a group of partners engaged to understand what is going on and propose solutions on how to go about it. So today, we have the pleasure to have here the colleagues from SIWI, the Stockholm International Water Institute, and also UNDP, to present these breaking water sector silos for climate action. So Robin, who is the program manager at SIWI, over to you. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Sylvia. It's great to be here. My name is Robin Ward. I'm a program manager here at the UNDP COE Water Governance Facility, where I'm specializing in looking at the interactions between drinking water sanitation and water resources, and also climate change, how climate change comes into that equation. So it's my pleasure here to welcome you to this segment of the adaptation session, breaking down water sector silos for climate action, which is co-convened by UNDP, UNICEF, and COE. So it's really great that we have the opportunity nicely, segueing from the UN Habitat segment to talk to you about this important topic. I think the climate crisis really highlights, the interdependence of both water resources management with drinking water sanitation and hygiene, or WASH as we like to call it, and also highlights the key mutually reinforcing roles that each sets of actors must actually play in tackling the crisis together. But as we know, that this is not always the easiest thing to do. Silos and fragmentation within the water sector persist. And I would say, although, silo working is nothing new to all of us, we see that actually, climate change disrupting the water cycle, that we need to redouble our efforts to overcome these silos and strengthen cooperation within the actual water sector itself. So in this session, we hope that you'll learn a bit more about what can, concretely be done by both water resources management and also water and sanitation actors to actually cooperate together for climate action, and then see actually that this brings a lot of wider benefits as well. So we will show in the session that actually the success of climate change adaptation in the water sector, very much depends on breaking down these silos. And we'll also show that, climate change presents a real opportunity for the water sector. So moving to the structure of this segment, first, we're very fortunate to have a keynote talk from Dr. Marianne Shelian, UNDP Headquarters Global Senior Water Advisor. She'll talk about overcoming fragmentation to manage climate risk. Then myself, I'll briefly speak to you on the opportunity that can be seized from the climate crisis. And then we'll have an in-depth interview segment with two countries from the south, so Liberia and Cabo Verde, which will be moderated by Katerina Davis from UNDP Headquarters. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Marianne Shelian. So over to you, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Climate change, it is a multiplier of risk. With the increasing variability and unpredictability of water availability, we have added pressure to our existing risk landscape of already variable water resources. And this, so what we see also with increasing demand for water, where there is global warming and hotter climates in many places, the competition for water is increasing. So this is putting additional pressure on our already fragmented institutional landscape. So these existing problems that we have, where WASH managers and water resources managers need to collaborate, but that means often being in coordination groups that cross institutional boundaries. Water services and sanitation services may often be under the purview and legislation related to ministries of health or public works. And we have the water resources management frameworks are more often linked to ministries of environment or ministries of water, embedded often in with the Ministry of Natural Resources or Energy. So this coordination requires often the crossing of institutional boundaries. And this interdependency, it's really increasing now with climate change. And so the existing pressure on water allocation, or the allocation of land and water use, to be more equitable and more efficient is increasing. And as we already heard in the previous session also, the way that water services in one location or downstream location depends closely on the watershed management in the upstream. Also, the basin management really relies on the sanitation infrastructure, the wastewater management and treatment and reuse. So the dependency is really two ways between the WASH actors and the water resources managers. Also that we see increasing multi-purpose or multi-use infrastructure, as we also heard in the first session, especially also drawing on nature-based solutions. And also that all infrastructure needs to be additionally robust to withstand also floods and droughts and other the threats being made more intense by climate change. So many of the threats are not new, but they're magnified or they're amplified by climate change. And in a sense, also our approaches are not new. It's the eye of the integrated water resources management, the integration across sector that is becoming additionally important. And it's always been needed. But now we see this crisis putting us on the spot to make this. It is also, as mentioned by Robin, it's also providing us with an opportunity. It seems like now the global mobilization to address climate change is actually helping in many cases. It's helping to overcome these institutional boundaries. And I think that's why we will be showing some examples in this session. So as noted, for example, in UNDP's recent report on the state of climate ambition, the updated nationally determined contributions by countries now submitted, they have leveled up, actually taken much higher uptake of integrated and nature-based climate solutions, which are in fact bridging institutional silos. And that's also where we'll see also later in this session, for examples from Liberia and Cabo Verde, who have also integrated these in the national determined contributions and leading the way in a sense to how these the institutional boundaries can be crossed. And well, in fact, we have the water sector plans were elaborated already by 100 countries in the first NDC submission, but they have now become more specific, more holistic, and cross-sectoral, including WASH, energy, agriculture, and also a quarter of the updated NDCs also address wastewater issues. So moving forward to implement these more integrated plans, we really rely on the institutional collaboration around the shared plans and visions. So, and also to do that, I'm very pleased now to hand back to Robin to also present some of the research we're doing on the opportunities to really help this closer collaboration and bridging the silos. So thank you so much, and back to you, Robin.
Thank you very much, Marianne. So just bear with me a second, I'll put up my slides. I hope you can see. Okay, so yes, I would just like to talk to you about an opportunity that actually we see comes out of the climate crisis that Marianne was also referring to. And from the perspective of a study that we were undertaking at the UNDP Seaweed Water Governance Facility that was commissioned by both UNDP and UNICEF. My apologies. Okay. So I think, first of all, I would like to say that, yes, as the title on this slide says, broader water sector cooperation is very much critical for successful water-related climate change adaptation. So, in order to have actually successful adaptation, it actually depends a lot, on understanding and responding to how climate change is going to disrupt the relationship between water resources and drinking water sanitation hygiene services. And then looking at it from the other perspective is that if we continue with fragmentation and silos, and then the related lack of understanding that comes from that of the actual interactions between water resources and drinking water sanitation under climate change scenarios. This could actually lead to different situations. For example, either there could be no adaptation if we're not working together. There could be adaptation, but ineffective adaptation. Or potentially at worst, there could actually be maladaptation. So if, for example, drinking water sanitation and hygiene actors, if we adapt without properly understanding the water resource through support from our water resources colleagues, then we could actually make the wrong decisions, and it could lead to maladaptation. Okay, so now moving on to talk a bit about the study that we were commissioned by UNDP and UNICEF to undertake. So yes, we did an extensive literature review and tried to find examples of where water resources management and WASH actors actually cooperate, not only in terms of climate resilient WASH, but also more broadly. So we looked at different areas such as equitable water resources allocation in the framework you see on the right-hand side, sustainable water management, drought and flood disaster resilience, climate resilient WASH, and integrated water sector governance. So these are all, we call them kind of shared outcome areas where we believe that, well, we understand that, the cooperation is actually between the two sets of actors. It's critical to achieve these outcomes. So for example, within the area of climate resilient WASH, then we have tried to look in the literature and identify good practices and case studies of specific, we call them like cooperation areas that need to happen between the two actors in order to, achieve climate resilient WASH. So, for example, there you see in the framework, the cooperation areas 10, 11, 12. So climate vulnerability and adaptation assessments, climate resilient water safety planning, and climate finance. These are just some examples, and I'm sure, of course, there are many more. The important thing also maybe to mention is that, within these different areas where the two sets of actors have to cooperate, cooperation is actually, mutually beneficial. So, for example, on early warning systems that are beneficial for WASH, then WASH needs to cooperate with water resources management actors. But also WASH can make an important contribution to wider early warning systems, for example, through if water utilities, for example, they have monitoring points of the extraction and discharge of the flows, the volumes, etc. This can potentially be a very valuable contribution to a wider early warning system within a country. It's just one example there. Zooming into one of the kind of the good practice examples that we identified through this study is actually in the Solomon Islands. In the Solomon Islands, there's a project that has finished now, but it was called the Solomon Islands Water Sector Adaptation Project. And this kind of really showcased this cooperation and collaboration we're talking about between the two actors. So it was a climate change adaptation project. It was led by the Water Resources Division, but in close cooperation with the Rural Water and Sanitation Department, and of course the Climate Change Division also within government. So under this project, which worked across the whole country in various different small islands in remote and vulnerable areas, vulnerability and adaptation assessments were undertaken by these different actor groups. And through robust water resources data, it was possible to identify, adaptation response options, which were, not only jointly identified, but they were actually developed and implemented in partnership between the two groups. And you can see some pictures of what those kind of measures look like there on the right. So we have hydrometeorological early warning systems. We also have expansion of rainwater harvesting capacity to bridge gaps between climate change induced droughts or extended droughts. And then we also have desalination. So yes, and then this project actually, finally culminated in these actors cooperating together to launch actually the first, I would say, very integrated and holistic policy, which is not a water and sanitation policy, which sometimes we're used to, but actually a water resources and sanitation policy. And I think this is quite a progressive way of looking at things. Then finally, I would just like to conclude by saying, yes, out of the climate crisis comes an opportunity, which we've already mentioned before. We did not only have to break down these water sector silos to actually address the crisis, and it is critical for successful climate change adaptation and to avoid maladaptation. But we also have to seize this opportunity. Climate change can be that, real trigger for breaking down these long-standing water sector silos. And by doing this, we get much, broad-reaching, wider benefits in terms of SDG 6 acceleration, Sendai framework, disaster risk reduction, etc. So I will leave it there, and then I would say that now we transition to the country case study segment of this segment. And then I would like to invite our moderator, Ms. Katerina Davis from UNDP. And Katerina Davis is working as a thematic expert on water, climate, and urban resilience at headquarters. And she will invite and have an interview with speakers from Liberia and Cabo Verde. So over to you, Katerina.
Thank you so much, Robin, for the introduction, and good morning from New York City. It's still night here. We now have the pleasure to hear from Liberia and Cabo Verde about how they manage the linkages between water resource management and the water and service sector. Let me welcome our panelists. First, Mr. George Yango. He is a water sanitation and hygiene specialist and worked as former Assistant Minister for Community Services at the Ministry of Public Works, Water and Sanitation in Liberia. Good morning to you, George. And Mr. Claudio Santos, he is the president of ANAS, that's Cabo Verde's National Agency on Water and Sanitation. Good morning to you too, Claudio. So, as we have just heard from Marianne and Robin, the service provision of water and sanitation on the one hand and the management of water resources are very closely linked. However, we find that in many countries, these two areas are still managed quite separately. So we are very curious to hear now from Liberia and Cabo Verde how they have been dealing with the situation. So the first question I would like to address to Mr. Yango. George, could you please describe the situation in your country, how these two areas are currently coordinated, and also what is the institutional landscape in terms of coordination and any various gaps that you perceive in Liberia? Thank you. Over to you, George.
George, you're on mute.
George?
Let me unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Could you also turn on your video, please?
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So, yes, you did mention a very useful period in my career when I was an assistant minister at the Ministry of Public Works in the early 2000 up to the late 2017. Yes, we struggled a lot because we realized there are a number of instruments that were not in place to support the sector. And so one of the things we undertook was to get support from the World Bank, SWA, the African Bank for Development, and we got some governance instruments and policies on board very early on. For example, the RWRM, Liberia has one, and And then there were a number of policies and a number of programs that will bring some level of reform to the sector. And those documents still exist for many reasons. They are not yet up and running, and actions that were deemed necessary to have been taken by the sector have not come through. One of the most successful ones that came through was the regulatory authority, and that's the Water Commission. The others are still on the books. Unfortunately, as we speak, the issue of water is seriously fragmented, water and sanitation. I'm counting now about 4 ministries, full ministries that have some level of authority, and then some agencies as well. Some city municipalities also have taken some responsibilities. But the most difficult one is how do we get these mandates that have been since the creation of these ministries and agencies that are not living up to what is happening in the world around. And for example, the very pressing issue of climate change. This is something that has hit us almost by surprise, with agencies not prepared. Not only do they not have the funding, but the instruments to operate with have really not been designed to be able to take these issues head on. So those are the big challenges. And quite recently, in the last 5-6 years, we got the NDC coming on. Again, that was a very strange animal has just come into what we need to do. But yes, this is where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, George, for this overview. So we hear that in Liberia, the 2 areas are still managed in a pretty fragmented way, and the agencies are still following their traditional roles and mandates. So now I'm turning over to Claudia to see how these areas are managed in Cabo Verde.
Good morning to all. I don't know whether I've been heard okay.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I might say that the water and sanitation sector in Cabo Verde has seen vast advances since the creation of ANAS, the National Water and Sanitation Agency, established in 2013 as a public institution during the reform carried out with the second compact of the Millennium Challenge account, Cabo Verde. The challenge assumed was to address at that time that the water and sanitation sector was had to overcome historical deficiencies resulting from numerous institutions that at that moment responded for the water sector. That was the need to have a single institution, a single voice that managed the water sector. As a result of the reform, the water sector has been asserting itself socially and technically, and ANAS has contributed to its regulation by exercising the function of an independent authority in the definition of criteria, techniques, norms, rules, and procedures which aim to improve the quality and the sustainability of all service under its supervision, referring to the management of water resources, water supply, and sanitation, and solid urban waste altogether. ANAS defines and proposes to governments all the investment priorities in the sector and feeds back from established policies promoting the elaboration of implementation of directives and public policies for the mentioned sector. In addition to the important responsibility played by ANAS on behalf of the government, the role of licensor of the right to use of water is the fruit and management of water production and distribution system in multiple uses, including the management of the whole cycle of water from the perspective of a circular economy to improve the sector sustainability. The supervision of ANAS is done nationwide, and it coordinates all the investment projects in the sector. The activities carried out by the water production and distribution projects allowed Cabo Verde to guarantee at the end of 2020, despite previous 3 years of severe droughts, access to drinking water through public networks to more than 71% of the households, compared to 66.4% in 2015. They also allowed to guarantee to each resident in the territory at the end of 2020 an average of daily service of 43.8 liters per day compared to 2015. In the archipelago as a whole, the island of São Vicente are fully supplied almost 100% with desalted water, with the islands of Sal being the first one to have a water service 24 hours a day. The island of Brava is following. We hope very soon it will become 100% energy sustainable, renewable. And we hope that very soon Brava, with energy 100% renewable, will also produce energy for the desal plant. Most of the islands are going to desal due to our difficulties with water, the droughts. So our natural resources of water are depleting, so we have to go to desal. We do that in major urban areas, desaling water directly from the sea for the water supply. And in rural areas, we use boreholes that have somehow become a little salty to desal. Between 2016 and 2020, ANAS has renewed license and grants for right to use of water for various uses. And also we control all the investments regarding mobilizing of drinking water, expansion of water supply networks, building of collectors and drainage domestic wastewater, and in industrial influence. It also proceeds with the closure of many municipal dumps, as well as operation and opening of sanitary landfills. In terms of governance, the water and sanitation sector includes the management besides of the solid waste, and it has developed instruments to regulate the activities of the sector, with emphasis on the legislation on the quality of water for domestic consumption, for quality of discharge, treated wastewater, and to the water quality control, as well for the preparation of a publication that we called HAZAS, that is done together with ARM, which is our counterpart for economic regulation, which is the Agency for Economic Multi-Sector Regulation. And this report is annually produced, and now we're having the 6th edition going on. So ANAS also has activity involved the creation of intermunicipal and municipal utilities which is very important in the island of Santiago, Boa Vista, Maio. And now we are engaged in closing the cycle with 2 islands that are left out, but we are going to close the cycle with the islands of San Nicolau and Santo Antão. Each will have a multi-municipal water utility. The institution participated in the process of creating the FASA, which is very important, and then we converted to environmental fund, aiming at promotional financing of water and supply sanitation infrastructure by funds coming from the state treasury to revenues that come from the payment of ecological taxes, as for example, taxes that people pay while importing plastic. So all this polluted material that get in pay taxes, part of these taxes comes to this fund where we finance most of the infrastructure for water and sanitation. The new government, the new constitutional government program 2021-2026 has aimed at results. For example, one is increase the rate of water supply network currently from 71 to 100% until 2025. Increase the water supply per person day from the 43.8 to a maximum of 90 liters per person to 2026. Reduce distance travel by those who do not have access to a water tap to less than 10 minutes from their houses by guaranteeing somehow public service for water supply, and increase from 35 to 60% of the population covered with liquid sanitation service and sewage connections. So those are what ANAS is doing as a technical institution, a technical regulator. We work together with the economical regulator. We set the tones for the infrastructures, for the policies, for the regulations. We control the water resources, which is scarce in Cabo Verde, and ARM sets the tariff, because in a place like Cabo Verde, the service have to be paid for. And in parallel, we guarantee that the municipal utilities are working. We control them, so they have to present results to us technically and to ARM in terms of guaranteeing that they respect the tariffs that are applied and published.
Thank you very much, Claudia.
Thank you.
Very comprehensive overview of how the areas that ANAS is covering, and it is very important to note this need for the close water and energy link for Cabo Verde, since Cabo Verde is very water scarce and has to rely on desalination of seawater and groundwater. The service provision of water has to go in lockstep with an increase of access to sustainable energy. Impressive also are the circular approaches that you are employing to improve water resource efficiency, recycling, and reuse. So this brings me to the second question, and I'm circling back to George. We wonder, now you've been describing the landscape, the institutional landscape in Liberia, and some of the gaps that still exist. So the question is, what needs to happen to close this gap so that Liberia can more effectively address climate change. You were noting that Liberia has been sort of surprised by the climate impact. So what needs to happen in terms of the institutional mandates and roles and modes of cooperation? And do you see any opportunity now through the Paris process, through the nationally determined contributions, as well as the national adaptation processes, to foster that sort of cooperation? Over to you, George.
Well, certainly a lot needs to be done. And looking at just the mandates seem inadequate to live with the new reality. And so there has to be some level of reform. And this is where it becomes quite difficult, because these are instruments that may have to go through our national legislature. But again, the president has the opportunity, he has the authority to engage into the creation of bodies that can take this emergency on. I will call that an emergency. And one of them is, for example, the NDC. Although the NDC in its revision did include other sectors that were not named, but the NDC still has a gap. There's no sector called water, and that is a big problem. The NDC needs to look at the water sector as being one of those sectors that has had or that will have or already has, but there will be increase in terms of the impact climate change will have on, first of all, water for drinking. As you know, our energy sector here depends heavily on hydropower, and that is worrying. The level of water is always seasonal, as you may know, and so there are attempts to also use solar power to be able to fill in some of the gap. But the bulk of the power that comes to our homes, mostly in Monrovia and some parts of Liberia, are the rivers that flow from the north down to the south. And we don't own those rivers. They are cross-boundary resources. And just trying to, again, emphasize the importance of why we need our neighbors and why we need to continue to plan together with them is cannot be overemphasized. So that is very, very, very important. But again, I think we need now to be looking at how our traditional organizations, government entities operate, what do they have in those mandates, and how can they be able to, again, incorporate the issue of climate change, the issues that has to do with the mitigations, and also some of the ways we can be able to live with what we cannot change. So I think it's very, very important. And I said again on an interview with you, Kathy, that the president is an enthusiastic person. He's been to Glasgow, he's been able to talk to the world leaders, and now coming back, it means it's time for us to walk the talk. It's time for us to be able to move on in whatever direction that is necessary. And again, on the issue of governance, I remember clearly in some of the policies, we had to go to the point where in order for ministries and agencies to be able to cooperate, we had to work with the office of the president. There was something called the PDU, and that PDU has a lot of credit for how the Liberia Watch Commission was created after we struggled from 2012 up to 2017. And I think it's very, very useful that the president be able to look at what we call the Water Resources and Sanitation Board. And that board is chaired by the president. So the president can call all of the water-related sanitation ministries and hold them to account. So this is very important. We need to look back at some of those documents that we did in the past and see how we can be able to put them into action. So I think this is very important.
Thank you very much, George. And absolutely, having the high-level political support is critical to make any meaningful changes. I am also circling back very briefly, so to Claudia, I'm very sorry we were running a little bit over time. But if you could briefly describe what's next for Cabo Verde. You already had a big head start, a forced one, may I say so, because as an island you were already forced to make these changes, experiencing the climate impact. But if you in 1 minute could just summarize what's next. Thank you.
Well, what's next? If you go to the NDCs, you see that in the mitigation contribution, the number two, for example, is increase renewable energy targets. That's what we have to do because we depend a lot in energy in Cabo Verde. Without energy, we cannot pump water, we cannot desal water. Our energy is expensive. It limits everything. I feel jealous with my colleague from our neighbor Liberia. We don't have any permanent wash in Cabo Verde anymore. Most of the natural resource of water have depleted because it does not rain. So we have to be creative, and that's what motivates us. In terms of the adaptation contribution, again, we have number one, which is improving water safety, natural replenishment while reducing carbon intensity in water. We have number two, which is improving sewage, solids, waste, and treatment of wastewater. Then we put again reuse of water, especially to guarantee that we have reused water for agriculture, and we use desal water, which is more expensive for water supply. So it's a learning procedure, but I would like to put it clear that nature has been very tough with us, and that's why we have to be creative to come up with alternatives. So it's a matter of survival, and we are small. 500 people indoors helps also in terms of getting solution and getting things done. Okay.
Thank you very much to both our panelists. This was very interesting to learn from both of you, and your situations are very different. And yeah, desperate situations call for creative solutions. So with that, I will hand over back to my colleague, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina, speakers from Liberia and Cabo Verde. We are over time, so I'll just say, yes, this is the close of this segment. Thank you to all speakers from UNDP, from the countries, and we look forward to continuing this important discussion with everybody. So thank you. Over to you back at the pavilion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is the third and last of the blocks of the adaptation session today. Before moving the point, let me say the importance of this contribution that have brought the colleagues from CIWI and from UNDP and with these two countries, because honestly, having been myself in several countries serving Senegal, Chad, Zambia, Madagascar, I have always felt this tension between water as a service and water as a resource. So I think that it's important that we have here some solutions, and I like this model of having 5 outcomes and how the 18 cooperation areas contribute to it. So thank you very much. It has been very useful. Let me just thank everyone that has participated in these 3 blocks. It has been very rich, all your comments. And now I am handing over to Jose to see if there is any question from the panel and from the chat.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Indeed, it has been a very interesting session, and thank you all for participating. Also, we've been monitoring the chat box in the YouTube channel. Thank you for all the positive comments there. Indeed, I would like to remark one of the things that it was said during the chat box, and it was a comment in reference on how the updated versions of the NDCs are actually picking up on water sanitation and hygiene. This is good news. The analysis says that we are getting 3 times more attention than before, but we need to remember that we got very little attention at the beginning, so we still need to work to have drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene in the NDCs. Now what I would like to do is to see if in our audience we have any questions for the panelists. And we have our colleague, Guy. Yes, please.
Great, thanks, Jose. So I'm Guy Howard from the University of Bristol. I've worked in both water resources and on WASH. Very interesting presentations. So I think one of the key questions that come back is whether the international community itself that is providing technical assistance and finance is actually properly joined up. So we often criticize countries because they're not linking water resources to services. But to be very honest, as an international body, we don't do it very well ourselves, and we often go into quite competitive settings. So I'd just be interested in reflections about what should we be doing more to join ourselves up at a global level in order to support countries to make the changes that they want.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the question, Guy. Perhaps I would like to invite colleagues from this last bit of the session. Perhaps Robin or Marianne, if you would like to perhaps take the floor to share some reflections on this. Robin? We just have a few seconds in case there is any... Yes. Yeah? Robin, thank you. Thank you. Just in a few seconds, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And maybe I also hand off to Marianne as well. Yes, I think this is something that we're very conscious of in, yes, also in our work and what we've been studying. And this is also part of the reason why, this is a joint study that was commissioned by UNDP and UNICEF under the auspices of UN Water. So it's, yes, this is very important. And of course, like I appreciate, Guy, your question. I think it's very, of course, very true. And much more does need to be done at an international level between the international actors, and not just, pointing fingers at countries saying you're not working together. We need to also lead by example in our support as well. So yeah, this is very important. I think the SDG 6 acceleration framework, of course, is very much aligns with this, trying to, at the international level, to try and align the different actors to actually work more together and not work in a fragmented way. And it actually highlights that, policy and institutional fragmentation, not only at country level, but at the international level, is a key bottleneck to progress. I don't know, Marianne.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the excellent question. I also think that the fragmentation that we have sometimes is also added to by the sectoral division of some of our funding, and there are very strict requirements sometimes that makes it difficult to have one support being very coherent and look at all the angles. So that's why I think the way to overcome for international agencies as well as national ministries, I think the focus on the household level, if we're able to really try to have that perspective, and I think that's both like our imagination, but also inviting the participation from the ground in developing projects, policies, and services, so that we have that perspective. And I think that is the way we can help ourselves overcome some of this fragmentation. But I think that also means struggle with some of the people that are funding us. So, but I think the closer to the local level, the greater the chance of success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Robin from UNDP and CIVI for answering this question. We are ready now to conclude this session. Actually, it's been 2.5 hours almost now. And now we would like to invite for closing remarks to Kellyanne Naylor, who is UNICEF Director for Water, Sanitation, Hygiene, Climate and Environment. So over to you, Kelly, for closing this session. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much, Jose. Greetings, everyone from New York. Excellencies, distinguished participants, what a great session. I think we can really feel the momentum here for water and sanitation sector to be a key player and the future of this climate action movement. And I think I was really reflecting that today we are really at the equator of this conference. And I think this week, many of us who've been following the conference remotely, you know, we've been hearing the news about how LDCs in African countries have really emphasized that most of the discussions continue to focus on mitigation, but yet that the most vulnerable obviously need to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And I think this really resonates so well in today's session, where we've tried to bring voices and success stories from the global south. And I think listening, I actually decided to change my background, and I was just fiddling with that. And I was thinking about how we've heard about the code red for humanity with climate change. And I think what we're hearing is that this is also a code red for water. And I think this was a map that was developed by UNICEF showing where children and their families are most water vulnerable, lacking drinking water and facing the greatest water scarcity. I think so this is kind of the face of this thirsty world that we're looking at. I think listening to our amazing speakers, it really struck me that we're not just proposing ideas or talking about the problem, but what we're actually seeing is how concrete solutions are already in action. And I found it so inspiring from the first part of the session, where we heard about the examples from Bangladesh, Mozambique, Madagascar. We heard the great presentation from the government of Pakistan, which brought this excellent example of the Clean Green Pakistan, where WASH is officially part of the country's NDCs. We heard from SNV and WaterAid that brought us the example from Nepal. In the second half of the session, we heard from UN Habitat and Nature Conservancy about the examples from the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance and this approach to climate resilience, with those excellent examples from Kenya, Jamaica, and several others. And I think just in this last segment, we've really heard from CIWI and UNDP about how these recommendations on breaking the silos between water resources management and WASH can come together so concretely in the examples presented by the colleagues from Liberia, Solomon Islands, and Cabo Verde. So I think this was just a tremendous tour around the world in 2.5 hours. And thank you to this amazing group of speakers. I think your work is so transformative, and I'm not sure how in the hybrid setting we give you another round of applause, but you really deserve it. And thanks so much to those of you who woke up early. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's so obvious that water is the primary medium through which we feel these effects of climate change. And I think on one hand, we've heard that climate change has such a tremendous negative impact on water and sanitation services that people are depending on for their daily life. We've heard that this is about survival, as the director of Pakistan mentioned. We've heard it's also about other human development objectives like health, nutrition, poverty reduction, gender equality, social inclusion, and education. These are all critical elements of achieving the Sustainable Development Goal targets for not only SDG 6, but so many other global goals. But we've also heard at the same time that the water and sanitation sector presents a huge opportunity to contribute to the global adaptation and mitigation goals. And this is through building a climate resilient, low carbon WASH sector. And this is, of course, why we're here today, because we're contributing to the commitments of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So I think it's so clear that these two things, sustainable development and the response to climate change, have to come together, and we cannot in any way separate the climate agenda from the sustainable development agenda. Hearing these examples, I can't help but feel optimistic that we're not alone on this journey. And I think it's really in no uncertain terms that the water and sanitation sector already has promising solutions to adapt to climate change that are ready to scale. And when we look at the potential of these contributions, they're really enormous. So I think coming back to the theme of today's session, adaptation, building adaptive capacity through climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions. So just to close, where do we go from here? So I think I really heard 5 key areas that we need to focus on to be able to take this forward. The first one, and I think that came out as a strong message, is we need better alignment between sectors. And we need to be doing this, as we've heard from UNDP and CIWI. We need to work across the whole of SDG 6. We need to be working with other sectors. And I think Robin really made the compelling case for breaking the silos. I think we've also heard that this isn't just about water working better with water, but it's really also about better engagement between sectors, with looking at those important synergies that between sectors that also rely on water, like agriculture and energy. And we've seen this in the case of Madagascar. Financing came out as clearly a key area. I think we've heard from recent reports. We had the update report on SDG 6 that said we need to accelerate by 4 times the current level of progress on water and sanitation to reach the SDG targets. And as Alex mentioned earlier, that LDCs, it's also been published that LDCs need to spend up to 10 times more on climate adaptation. So financing is going to be a key part of the how we're going to be able to accelerate progress. I think we've heard the compelling investment case for adaptation and climate resilient wash services, that it's a no regrets investment. But I think we've also heard that these funds are needed now if we're going to really be able to accelerate change on the time scale that is needed to be able to reach those most effective. Fourth, I think we've heard that we must focus on the most vulnerable and that there is a human face to this crisis. We also cannot forget that water and sanitation are human rights and basic services. We estimate that 450 million children live in areas affected by extreme water vulnerability. And last but not least, we've really heard for research and innovation being such a part of the solution, but also getting those innovations and that evidence and research into the hands of those who need it most. So colleagues, climate resilient water and sanitation champions, I just want to finalize this by thanking all the partners who contributed to the session, the organizations supporting this first ever water pavilion, and of course to all of our listeners here joining us on Saturday morning, afternoon or evening. This must be a marriage between the climate agenda and the sustainable development agenda to be able to accelerate our progress on both the SDG 6 targets, but also on climate action. So thank you for joining forces today in the Climate and WASH marriage, documenting the date of the 6th November. And together, I think we must succeed in this task, both for our planet, but also for the world's people and for every child from this generation and those generations to come. So thank you so much, and back over to the organizers of the session.